All right. So I have been working with a pattern that I'm calling context networks. It probably is going to get a new name at some point, but that's what I'm calling it right now, as a way of collaborating with AI, LLM based AI agents. And I've been meaning to get around to this, making a video demonstrating what it looks like, how they work, and some subsequent videos about a little bit more tutorial kind of thing. Today, we're mostly going to be focusing on what does setting one of these up look like, how do they work, how do you work with them, that kind of stuff. The nitty gritty of like how to replicate this yourself is going to come in other videos, but I wanted to get some version of it out there because trying to explain this in text is not always working super well. But it has stabilized, the concept and the way it works has stabilized enough that I feel like if I make this video I won't have to redo it in a week, which for a while would have been the case. We are going to be talking about context networks, which is a collaborative framework for human AI knowledge management. There's a quote I've been saying an awful lot about my AI journey, which is that the future's already here. It just is not evenly distributed. That's from cyberpunk author William Gibson. It's a fairly famous quote. But a lot of what I'm doing here with context networks is, I believe, at least one of the ways in which people are going to work in the future. It can be an expensive thing, depending on what your definition of expensive is, to work this way. But that's often how I, as a technologist, approach the stuff that I'm looking to learn and looking to push forward, because what's expensive now is going to be much cheaper in 6 months, 18 months, 24 months, etc. And so understanding that stuff is a much easier way to predict at least that short-term future, that 6 months, a year, 2 years. In that kind of time frame, it's easier to predict something if what you look at is what's impractical right now rather than what's impossible right now. And what I'm showing you today with these context networks is at the impractical becoming practical, but you have to be willing to invest some time and money in order to make it work this way. But I think that is a worthwhile thing for people who are forward looking to be looking at. These two URLs are the ones that are most relevant to what we're doing today. The top one is the GitHub page for the context network repository itself. That page describes some of what we're talking about today, and then the repo underneath it, that's linked in that front page article, is where you get the files, the prompts, the framework documents, that kind of stuff to actually put this into practice. And then the project underneath that is the first of what's going to be a series of template repositories that are, this one is a really generic one. It's intended for kind of any kind of project. And today I'm going to be demoing specifically, we're going to just do something with fiction, because sometimes these tools give the impression that this is a code only kind of an approach, a thing that only works if you're vibe coding or if you're trying to do structured software development. And the reality is that I found over the last couple months that this context network thing works on anything that you can put into text files. And I'm using it to do research projects. I'm using it to do novels and fiction stuff. I'm using it to write a new tabletop RPG. But I'm also using it to write software. And so I started, this one is the first of those templates, and it is the most generic version. And then I'm going to be working on customizing it so that there will be a version for if you want to do Python software development, or you want to do TypeScript software development, or you want to do world building for a story world, you want to do a novel, you want to write a nonfiction book, you want to do analysis of something. All those kinds of project types will be built to tailor this generic one to a starting point for those kinds of projects. So today we're going to be going over the context network idea, that first URL, and then we're going to be using the bare context network and turning it into something that will manage a novel in this case. What is a context network? It's a structured framework for organizing, navigating, and evolving complex information spaces. Some of this is a little bit of dense terminology. I'm looking for ways to simplify it. Anything anybody's got as a contribution, I'm willing to hear. Multidimensional information organization system. So the fact that you can get at it in different directions and connect things is a big part of how this works. It provides explicit processes for documenting the relationships between information and for like how you want to work. And that's a big part of this, is that every context network starts out like with the base one we're going to talk about, and then it eventually becomes its own thing. You train it up to work the way you and it want to work together. Provides a navigation protocol for navigating all of the complex stuff you're going to be tracking, and it provides a way to evolve the information structures as your needs change. It treats information as a living ecosystem rather than as static records, is one of the big takeaways. What are the components? There are information nodes, which is literally pieces of information in files. We store them in markdown files. There are context maps that indicate how those nodes relate to each other. There are navigation protocols, which are processes for going back and forth and identifying the right context to pull in. And that's where this all comes from, is when you're working with a large language model, what's in context, what's in the prompt that's going back and forth, managing that is a big deal, particularly if you're working on lots of files and a fairly complex thing. A lot of people, when they start, work with a couple of sentences as their entire context in the chat, and then the chat itself becomes context, and then they move on to projects where they've got some documents, some knowledge that are kept in context. And there's this idea that, oh, if I just keep adding to the context, it will get better. And there is, in fact, a point at which it tips over and too much context becomes a problem. And this pattern is about addressing that problem of how do you keep in the sweet spot in the middle the exact amount of information that is most useful for working, and not that you don't forget the things that are important, but you also don't overwhelm and get confused with too much information. And then also there's some of that which is you as a person using context networks need to learn how to work with them so that you aren't contributing to that problem. When do you start new tasks? All that kind of stuff is part of it. A lot of this we're going to have to talk about in other videos. And then there are the evolution mechanisms for how it adjusts and adapts over time. We're going to see some of those play out in that we're going to start with a generic context network, but it's going to fairly quickly start having novel fiction stuff in it that are very specific to that. And that is the evolution from the base into something that is specific to the project. Key benefits are it works with existing text files. This is all based generally on markdown files, or in the case of code, whatever your coding language is. And we aggressively use version control in the form of Git and GitHub, but you can use any version control you want. But you should use version control. If you are working with large language models against files on your computer, you should be using version control. And if you don't know anything about version control, there's a link coming up in my newsletter where I'm covering a bunch of this information. It reduces cognitive load because you've got explicit structure. It lets you do that. That part is a big deal for those of us with ADHD because it lets you work on something intensely for a couple hours one day and then forget about it for 2 weeks, and then you can come back to it. And because the structure is explicitly keeping track of what's happening, you can pick up where you left off and keep going. And that's often been a thing that a lot of organizational systems fight me on, and it lets me embrace that nature. It preserves context across sessions, which is part of what I was just talking about. And if you are doing context network in a team kind of setting, it does allow for that context to be shared between the team and the AI members of the team as well. And it enables a much more effective AI collaboration. You're working with the LLM agent levels up in ways that a lot of people are really surprised with if they've never worked this way with LLM AI. And it adapts to the changing project needs. There are two different information domains when you're working with. One is the context network itself, and we tell the LLM that is the team's memory. That is what the team of people and the LLM know about the project. And then we call the project artifact domain everything outside of it. So in the case of a novel, the project artifacts are the actual outline, the manuscript, explicit, like anything we're doing that's a character sheet or any of those kinds of things are project artifacts. And there may also be a representation of those things in the context network, but it helps it to understand the distinction between things that are the way we are keeping track of things, and then the project artifacts are the things we're keeping track of, if that makes sense. That took a little bit of back and forth and improving the prompts to get the LLM to understand this distinction. And so it's important that people understand it as well. This is the newsletter I was talking about. It's on Substack. It's called Scriptonomy. And the goal is basically to take the tools, techniques, patterns from the world of software development and applied artificial intelligence and help everybody who's now in a world where lots of people are writing code that are not having the job title of developer. Lots of people are working with AI that don't want the job title of developer, but they do want digital autonomy. And this is about scriptonomy is the thing. There's a free newsletter is what it is right now. There also is a paid tier that doesn't have a lot of stuff in it right now. I've just got a few people who are generously helping the workout. And then there will eventually be a paid community where some of the tools I'm writing with AI will be available. Resource libraries, a lot of that kind of stuff is going to be there. But I'm making an awful lot of it free because I would just rather tilt that way more often, as long as I'm able to continue to find work and fund myself that way. So that's the newsletter. If you want, like I mentioned about the Git repository stuff, I'll be teaching some of that kind of stuff there, as well as how to use Visual Studio Code in general as a tool, even if you're not writing code. All that stuff is in that newsletter. My goal here is not to give you here is exactly how to do it in a tutorial kind of sense. This is about demonstrating what it looks like to use one. And if that's intriguing to you, then you would want the tutorial stuff. But I need that demonstration to happen for some people to understand what I'm even talking about. And that's what we're here to do. So this is Claude. I actually use this far more than I use GPT. All the model stuff that we're going to be doing today with the LLMs themselves is using this Claude 3.7 or 3.5 model. There are reasons to pick back and forth, but we're pretty much going to stick with 3.7 today. And a lot of people, their main interaction with LLMs starts with this chat box, right? You type in the thing, you start a conversation, and you keep going. There are pieces in here which will let you do. This is a level at which most people are writing a paragraph or two, and it'll set you up for that kind of interaction. And the thing is that pretty much all the chatbot tools that are based off LLMs have this as a mode. Some of them have a research mode. Claude added theirs as a beta for, I think you have to be on the sort of second higher tier than even the first paid tier to have it right now. But it does exist as a thing, and a lot of people operate here. Now, Claude also has projects. And projects let you take, and this one is one that I've got, it's a story idea generator, and it's where you can have it come up with with ideas for stories. And a lot of my personal research on artificial intelligence and applied AI is around narrative, because it is a thing that it's fairly hard to get an LLM to do well. And so it's helping me understand where the frontier actually is and where it stretches. That's why I'm using it as an example today. I'm giving away pretty much every story that comes out of this stuff. But over here on the right, we've got project knowledge. And this allows me to put together documents that I've, in fact, often collaborated with Claude to put together. But this one includes like a whole framework for how to do character naming, a whole framework for if we decide to take Hamlet and translate it into space, this framework for adapting public domain literature will happen. And this implementation guide is just about how to do story generation, which is a fairly long 150-line prompt I came up with. There's some stuff around different settings that I tend to like. I like historical fiction. I'm not a huge fan of epic fantasy, but I do read some urban fantasy and sci-fi. Today we're actually going to be working with sci-fi, and then the genre framework around a story structure. And all these documents are then part of the context when I start having conversations. So if I say, how could we translate Shakespeare's The Tempest to a sci-fi setting? That's the kind of thing that I can ask the story generator, and it will take what is obviously a very public domain kind of story, and you'll see that it does an analysis of The Tempest and puts together what are the key relationships, the social forces, the plot architecture, and then it tries to put together some ideas for the kinds of stories you could tell, or the way you could tell that story. So in this case, Wonder is if you listen to the podcast Writing Excuses, they had an elemental genre season that's really a great way to frame the understanding of story. And so Wonder is their genre of talking about awe through a magical displays transformation, the exploration of an unfamiliar realm. And then you also can bring in drama, relationship, and power. It's going to look up how to pick a setting in a sci-fi world. In this case, it picked far future, isolated system, a technology level, soft sci-fi with transhumanist. It puts in whether or not they're aliens, what kind of relationship humans have with them. And then it starts identifying the main characters and how we could translate them. And then you'll see that it puts together the concept and evaluates whether it's any good. Now, I've done this a bunch of different times, and you can continue to ask for other versions. And this one was done in a far future, 500 years, etc. It will do it in different versions. You can specify, I'd rather have a near future, I'd rather have a cyberpunk future. All those kinds of things can be put in here as more details, and it will give you much more. These are the kinds of tools I'm going to be providing for people in the paid tier, because running the tokens for this does cost money. And so this kind of thing uses all of the documents that were over in this project knowledge over here in order to make this work really well to do a specific thing. And these are the kinds of projects that I'm translating now into folders on the computer, and you letting more sophisticated agents do this work is a progression that this goes through. And then, like in this case, I have a story idea developer. And if I take this piece of it, now, just so we're clear about one of the reasons I use the word artifact is, so you see that it put all this content here. If I follow this up, there's a specific word in Claude that you want to use for this. So right now I could obviously copy, or what I was about to do, which is highlight. But if I ask it specifically to turn it into an artifact, is the word that Claude uses to describe the kind of document it's about to create. And it's this. So these ones that sit in here, you'll see over to the right here, I now get what we just had. So like it's pretty much just outputting the same information because I asked it to. You can also have it read into an entirely different thing. And in your initial prompt, you can specifically use that word artifact, and it will create something over here. And then what you get is the ability to download this as Markdown, save it as a PDF, and also publish this document as a shareable URL. So using the word artifact matters a lot. It also then provides a way that, like, the knowledge that I was showing you added to the project, often this is how I got it. I was working in a chat. I would have it generate an artifact. I would export that artifact as Markdown, and then I would go to the project and I would add it as a document to the whole thing. So now, in this case, I am actually going to just copy this all because I don't need to show you my whole file system when we're doing this. Copy that. And then if we go to the project that is the story idea developer, I can say I want to develop, and you'll see there's a bunch more documents over here. And that includes if you're writing speculative fiction, which is a lot of what I'm doing. So my story idea stuff tends to tilt that direction. This has got things about how to do systemic world building. The character naming thing is here again. The writing excuses stuff is here again. But there's also some things around how to build and evolve economic systems, how to build belief systems and religious systems, how to build economic systems. All of that is in here, and that allows the world building to get a lot more realistic. There's one in here in institutional design. How do governments evolve in fictional worlds? All that kind of stuff is over here, and you'll see that I'm using 22% of the knowledge size. There is a maximum size on the amount of the context and go in here, and so this is a pretty healthy amount of context, especially if you get a good conversation going. But if I say I want to develop this story idea, and then I paste it in, it sometimes is the size that it'll fit in here. Otherwise, it will show a document down here like this. I thought it was kind of at the threshold there. And so if I say that, I will get a result that digs in. It's going to do another analysis. You will see a little bit of the repeat of information as these things go from one to one. That's actually not a bad thing because it carries context forward. And you'll see in this case that it's identifying that if we are using wonder, we need to have a strong initial alien encounter. We need to have a scale of the revelation. We need to have a perspective shift. We need to escalate the wonder. For drama, these are the things we need. For relationship, these are the things we need. For issue, these are the things we need. And then you'll start to see that it sketches out a plot that matches the plot of The Tempest. And then you've got a sequence of the approaching threat. Now, you don't have to take this as an answer. And again, you'll see this, it created it in line here. I should have said, I want to build the story. Please write anything that you, as a matter of fact, why don't I stop it and do that? So if I come in here and we go, I'm going to just go back up here. I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to say place all work output in artifact documents. All right, and we'll paste it back in again. All right, so we'll kick that off. And in this case, you'll see that saying that place all work in artifact documents, see there it created an artifact. There was a point at which, and I think it was the difference between Claude 3.5 and 3.7, where it shifted. And before, it would put things in artifacts more on its own without having to say that. As of some recent update, you have to be much more explicit about saying that. But a lot of what I'm showing you right here is about the way in which I evolved my way in my workflows to working the way we're going to do with a context network. You'll see we've got this whole document that's spit out here. Now, the story that I want to talk about today that we're going to take over to Visual Studio Code and work with a context network is one that I've wanted to do something with for a long time, but I've never had the time. And that's what a lot of this AI stuff is providing, is it's able to put ideas that never fit into my time schedule kind of stuff in places they wouldn't have fit before, where it can be a few hours here and there suddenly turns it into actual progress on it. And so what we're going to talk about is Kowloon Walled City. And if you've never heard of Kowloon Walled City, look at this Wikipedia article. It's a totally fascinating thing that happened. And it's a spot where there was some weird jurisdictional who owns it kind of thing. And it ended up with this really compact and highly dense place that was in a little bit of a legal limbo. And it grew in some really odd and interesting ways because there was no regulation on what got built. There were tunnels through the back of buildings into other buildings, and it no longer exists. You will see, I've seen quite a few actually, TikTok videos where somebody is, I just learned about Kowloon City. It's amazing. It's really this complex place with a lot of crime, and which makes it a rich kind of an idea for a story world. But as of 1994, it looks more like this. They tore it all down, and it now is a park. It's gone, but I'm fascinated with the idea of a place that sits in this weird liminal space of legality and what that does for people making their own way in that space. It's what Frontier's settlement looked like, setting aside the problems around colonialism and settlement, but they're part of the thing. And I believe that when we talk about a sci-fi future, that possibility is very strong. And so this is the story idea that I've wanted to work with and turn into something. And so I have run this idea through conversations with Claude. So if I come over here and I do search my chats and I search for Kowloon Walled City, imagined as a space station, this was me talking to Claude about how to take all the interesting history and things that shaped it and make a sci-fi setting. This was not done with the story idea generator, but it was the kind of thing that was what exactly made Kowloon Walled City a thing. And it was the disputed territory between British Hong Kong and China. And what would a space station equivalent look like? And then what are the physical constraints? How do we translate that? This is similar to what we were looking at when we were talking about how do you translate Shakespeare? How do you translate a real thing into a story world? And then I start talking about what would it look like if we had a disputed system or two conflicting powers, both backed out and treated as a DMZ, and then companies aren't allowed to create anything permanent, and that sort of keyword permanent lets weird things like this happen. So we had this conversation and talking about if they're aliens or not, what does that all look like, and get to how does this thing evolve. Fairly long conversation, as you can see, and got me to this is like another evolution framework that can happen around Kowloon like space station. And so this is a framework document that I would include if I was making a new project in Claude. But increasingly, when you use Claude here, this whole like having to export files, upload files, and if you're in, like, let's go look at one of these projects here. If you're in this project, their UI for managing these is not very good. I can upload from a device, I can add text contact. I can do Google Drive, and I have done that for some projects, but getting it updated is slow. And if you have one of these things revise one of these documents, it can't actually edit it because you can't edit it either. This is not editable. You'll see that it did it right there. And so what you have to do is delete this document and re-add it, And that's problematic as far as like getting into the flow of work. And so taking these kind of files and putting them in actual files in a folder and putting them under version control as a developer, that just makes sense to me. And so then using the tools that I'm going to show you, you can manage those files and build them into something that manages the context more aggressively than even this does. And the agents are able to then alter those files. And now you get a complete loop of flow happening. All right, so that's the basics of the kind of story that we're going to try to write. This is the page that I was talking about before, which is the home page for context networks themselves. It talks about how this actually came about in part because of Klein, which is a tool I'm going to show you here in a second, the memory bank, and how it's a little bit different. This comprehensive guide is actually what is used to have an LLM write a new agent, and you'll see that there's a whole bit of documentation about what the standard context network looks like. This is a little bit software centric. The bare context network I'm going to show you next is a little bit more generic than that. And that is what it's just got maintenance and evolution. And the thing is that these are not yet working the way I want them to. So like the schedule review process and everything, I actually want to build code agents that would be able to do this stuff more on a scheduled basis is part of the idea. All right, so we're going to go over to this, which is the bare context network, and this is a template repository. So this button over here, this one is public. You should be able to get to it. And this lets you create a new repository. Now, in my previous conversations with Claude about this story idea, I had named the space station that's going to be in this limbo territory, the gourd, as in squash or whatever, a gourd. A whole bunch of reasons why, but as a result, I'm going to create a new repository called the gourd in my private repos for this. So in this case, you'll see this. I'm going to make it private mostly because I don't want to have to pay attention carefully to anything that ends up in there that is specific to my machine. I may export pieces of it if people want to see this and share it later. But in this case, I'm going to pull that over. I'm going to call it the gourd. You can always make a repository public later too. I never remember how to spell that word. To Kowloon Walled City. All right, so I'm going to create that repository. Here it is. I'm going to grab the command to clone that down. Inside here, we're going to check out the gourd. All right, so now that we have that, I'm going to go to the gourd code, and we will open this up. And you will see that we have a context network folder. A lot of it is empty, but it does include some basic things, some templates, the basic idea of what a context network is, documentation of the structure, some ideas on how to do maintenance, what a node looks like, what updates we've had done to it, any planning, and our processes. It's worthwhile looking at these to understand what's all going on, but also inside the inbox are a couple of things. One is the actual guide to what a context network is, how they work, principles, implementation, which is what an LLM used to build out this folder structure and adjust it. And then there is a file here, which is the custom instructions prompt. Now, the README does step you through what I'm going to show you, at least at a super high level. But the basic idea is that if you install the plugin Klein, and we can look at it over here in the extensions. So Kleinbot, the one with 1.5 million downloads, this is the extension we're actually using over here. And I keep this one over on the right side. And we've got a bunch of the previous work that I've got. I've got some other ones as well. But inside here, you will specify which provider of LLM capability you want. I'm using OpenRouter, which allows you to use a whole bunch of different models. To use Sonnet, I don't use the Anthropic one directly because this lets me have a lot more flexibility, and still I can use that model. And you specify from their site what the model you want to use is, whether or not you want to enable extended thinking or not, and this will tell you what your cost of running this is going to be. And this is basically $3 per million tokens and $15 per million tokens for output. And a million tokens sounds like a lot until you start seeing this work, in which case you can burn through a million tokens faster than you might think. But also, even a heavy evening of using this costs about what lunch does. It's not a burden to me, but I want nobody to go into this surprised if they get a bill. We will see how it will show you what you were spending. It's upfront about it the entire time you use it. This interface down here, I don't like that it's a simple little one-line text box. It does grow a little bit, but this should be much bigger in my opinion. And then, so we're going to type our interactions here. This is over on the left's got our whole file tree. And there are things like we can specifically reference files. We can put screenshots in. Claude will handle screenshots. There also is this manage MCP servers is additional tools that the LLM agent is available to use. And in this case, we're going to use one in particular that I use a lot. And that is, you'll see that my domain availability is broken. That I'm rewriting that one. But there's one called research is useful to know. And I thought from this screen you could get to the full view of it. You cannot. But if I go to the one up here, which is the same icon, and I choose installed, I can expand research. And what you'll see is that the research MCP server provides a basic web search, which is just using DuckDuckGo. It does a really light research report, which is something that doesn't need a lot of depth, medium, and deep. And then it also has the ability, if it grabs a URL from one of these research reports, it can go get the page content for it, right? So these are the tools that I'm using. And then I happen to have this checked to auto approve all tools. The request timeout is fairly long at 30 minutes because the deep research report is fairly long. I'll do another video on how to set this kind of MCP stuff up, but since I'm going to use it, I thought you should know it exists. All right. And then the other big thing to note down here is there's a button here that says plan, and there's a button here that says act. When it's in plan mode, Klein can do research. It can use that research tool. It cannot write to files. So plan mode is your safe interaction to have a conversation about the files, about the project, about strategy. Do as much as possible in plan mode, because when you then, the instant you toggle to act, it will not ask you for any more input. It will take action on the plan that is in place. And so get the plan right before you do anything else. And so I always start a new task, which you can do with this button up here. You'll also see there's new task buttons that pop up all over the place as you're going. But I always start it in plan mode before going any further. So in this case, I'm just going to start working with this thing. And because right now the context network is a generic one, it doesn't even know we're writing a novel, I'm going to start there. So I'm going to say this project is writing for a novel. What changes to the context network structure? I'm going to say the generic context network structure. Make the most sense to set us up. And I'm even going to say that this is a sci-fi novel, just so that we are specific. Now, in plan mode, if what I get back is off the rails, I will just start a new task and rewrite this prompt until I get it, until I'm clear about what I'm saying and it's clear about what I'm saying as well. And I'm not going to say to write a novel. I'm going to say to research, plan, draft, and edit a novel. See how the more specific you can be, the better this stuff works. And I'm going to kick that off. All right, so this is now going to, you'll see up here we've got a meter running, and this is how much money it is spending. I guarantee you some of you are going to have a reaction that this is a highly offensive number that's going to spend, and some of you are going to be wondering why those people are upset. It is the nature of this thing. So what you'll see whenever you're using this is it did a whole bunch of discovery stuff here, and that's actually because this custom instructions prompt here, I added it to the custom instructions here for client. Now, every one of these tools has you put those instruction prompt things somewhere different. In this case, this is where it puts them. And what they pretty much do is that every time you start a new task, it will read this and it tells it how to figure out what's going on. Because when you start a new task for this agent, it doesn't know anything other than what's in those prompts. And so that first prompt tells it to look at this file, this .context network, and it says, hey, there's a context network in this folder. Here's what it's for, and here's how to use it, and here's the first place you should look in that folder for figuring it all out. So that directs it to this context network folder and to the discovery file. And the discovery file will have in it all of the explanations about how to navigate it, where to start. Turns out that a lot of this stuff is also very useful for people, which is why this is a really great collaboration kind of thing, because it keeps really good documentation of what's happening. It will read this, and then from here it will say, I do want to start with the foundation project definition. So if we go up in this history over here, you'll see that it started by reading the discovery file. It then read the project definition. It then read the structure. It then read principles. It read the README, which in this case it's going to realize that the README is not actually for a novel yet. It went back to the context network file, and then it read a node template, which it now knows that it's going to need to make nodes, right? And then you'll see a point at which it crosses where it'll say, based on the files I read, I think I know what's going on here, right? So this is that, I've been joking a lot about that movie 30 First Dates, where Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, and she forgets every morning who she is and what's going on. And this is the way in which it recovers from that amnesia and figures everything out. And now up here, you'll see that we spent 9.4 cents so far doing this. That number is always available, and it will also tell you how much of the context window we are using. So Claude operates on a 200,000 token context window. If this ever starts creeping up, you want to tell this to write whatever's relevant from this task into the context network, and you will in fact hit that button and start over with a new task, start over with new memory, and work back up, because it's pulled too many things into the context, and it will start to get confused at about this 75% mark. And so you want to keep it more in the middle here. Now, Client also does some of its own helpful management of this along with the context network. And if you eventually I'm going to turn a lot of what we're seeing here into agents that are not bound to this tool, and those will have to manage their own context window. But you'll see it's now going to put together a proposal for a context network modification for a sci-fi novel. And there's a diagram here. It's a fairly... You'll see that the zooming is weird and apparently it doesn't want to zoom back out. But you'll see that there was stuff in there. We're going to do some world building. We're going to do narrative. We're going to do characters. And then we got settings, technology, history, and rules, plot, themes, scenes, arcs. And in a software project, these folders would be utterly irrelevant. But in a novel project, they are very relevant. And so this is that adaptation and evolution I'm talking about with the context network, where because of the kind of project we're doing, it changes the base structure. And as we add more to it, this will change to even suit this specific novel. But I want to start it with what a novel is and what we would be doing. Now, if I decided to say, just for example, because so much of what I'm doing, I don't care about the market analysis because I'm not trying to sell this story. I'm using it for research purposes and to teach folks how this all works. And just because I want to read the dang story, I'm not looking to claim the title of author, writer, any of those kinds of, I don't want those identities. I just want this I want this idea to turn into something, and nobody else is going to write it for me. So all of this is here. We've got a whole modification system for what it's going to do. It's got some novel specific navigation paths. Now, you should absolutely read through everything it outputs over here. The number one thing that I see people do when they start working with an LLM agent is to start letting this happen without even skimming it, much less reading it. But the more you read this, the better you will get, the better it will get, and the better your collaboration will get. I've done this particular one several times in the past, so I'm not going to be reading it as carefully. I'm skimming to make sure there's no major differences from how it's done it in the past. I also have auto approve set to a huge number of things. The only thing I actually don't let it do is edit files outside the project. That's the one thing that I require it to ask. And then I have my max request turned way up, which allows it to be a little bit more autonomous and run. Keep this number very low when you are just starting, especially if you were concerned about your budget, because this will basically make it check in it's basically this number of times, every one of these things up here that said API request, that's what it's counting. So API request, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you set that number to 5, it would have checked in right here and said, do you want me to continue? And that will allow you to make sure that it's on track in spending your money in a way that you're okay with. I've been working this way for several months, and so I'm a little bit more comfortable than you probably should be starting out. So dial that number down, set it to not approve anything, and watch what it asks you to approve. And when you are starting to feel confident that, hey, every time you ask me that, I say yes, so go ahead and you can check that box, right? So in this case, it's going to put together a plan. Now, we can absolutely have a conversation and say, I don't want the market research stuff in there. You can pull that out. I want to actually make this a series instead of just a novel. How do we structure? Let's actually say that just because it'll be an interesting thing. So I'm going to say, what if this novel was the first in a series? Should we alter the plan? And you'll see that it's a little bit too sycophantic. It'll tell you everything's an excellent point unless you ask it to criticize, and you totally should ask it to criticize. But you'll see it's going to adjust that, and you'll now see series and books, and it's going to change that. And as soon as you're happy with the plan, so it's going to busy putting out a detailed plan for what it's all going to be. All right, so now it's got all this stuff, and we can say, okay, that plan looks good. Let's integrate all of that into the context network. You're going to write a lot of these kind of sentences, especially when you're getting going, to just be really clear about what you mean and what's going to happen. And so I just always tell it, like, you wrote this all, but until it goes into the context network, it doesn't exist. So I'm going to be explicit about telling it, let's integrate that into the context network when I toggle to act. And I'll put that in, which is basically me telling it I'm about to click this button. But this is your last chance to say something before that happens. But it also tends to give it a moment to be clear to itself about the plan. We're at about 35 cents right now. I'm going to keep pointing at that so you see and understand what's all going on here. So when I toggle to act, it will not offer me a chance to come up here and type another message before it just goes. So I hit act, and you'll see it just starts. That's a thing I wish they would change, but it is what it is. Now it's going to start making changes. And you're going to see this structure appear a lot, which is that it's going to apply the differences to the file. And so you will see anything on the left that's red is what it is removing or changing, and on the right is anything that it is adding or modifying. And so it's going to spin through this file, and then it's going to spin through the next file, and then it's going to spin through the next file. And sometimes you'll see that the LLM doesn't quite get the formatting right on doing that, so it'll revise. I think there's a way to improve the prompt on that, so it would be, but I think Klein's working on that actually. And I mostly point that out to point out that this is what agents with a small amount of autonomy do. Whenever we talk about autonomy in AI, a lot of people tend to automatically assume that it means like being given the high-level task of go come up with an idea for a novel and write one, instead of this much, much smaller task of putting together little things at a time, one set of files that needs to be changed. And you'll see here now it's making the folders that it was talking about, and it's now going to start putting files in them. And then over here we'll see this is our Git tab, our source control tab, and you'll see all of the files that it changes will start showing up over here. And as soon as this task is done, I will commit those to the version history so we have them as a snapshot. The more often you commit, the better your history and the ability to go back and look at something. If it happens to go in a direction you don't want, you have that history to go back to and revert to. It's one of the reasons developers use version control so aggressively, even on projects where you are the only person working on them. It's a very useful tool. So it's going to continue to do this. In the meantime, I'm going to go grab, let's go grab some of the documents from that I showed you, like that were in Claude already. Some of the ones that are about like how to do world building, how to do character naming, all those kinds of things. Those are documents I'm going to want to have it incorporate in. And often I have things from the outside that, especially like at work, from meetings and whatever else that need to integrate. And so I'm going to show you that pattern. But you can see this is busy doing its thing. So now I'm going to go out to GitHub, and I have a private repository that is my prompt guides, and this has a bunch of my fiction documents in it. So this has a lot of those documents that we were looking at. It's got how to do world building. It has a sensitivity reader that can be done, the adapting public domain. These are all the ones that you saw in the Claude project that are here as files that I can just grab. And so I am going to pretty much grab all of these, and I think I've even got a folder checked out for it. I'm going to literally just, in fiction, I'm gonna open this folder in Finder, and then I have these files. So I'm going to start with systemic world building, story idea generator, sci-fi module, generator, developer, and character naming. I'm going to start with those. I kick back over here and hide that one. And you'll see it's still going. So we're at $1.03 now, but it has built out a fairly large set of things here. This is why I said I was going to fast forward, because I'm going to fast forward through some of this stuff or cut it out. I also want the elemental genres, which I was missing. Now, as I'm building a context network up, I start from the most generic and work toward the specific, because as this series of commits happen, like right now, if we were to, when this task is finished, we were to commit all these changes and then make a copy of that, we would have the starting template for a novel series, which is what I'm going to do to build up all of the templates for going forward. But if we had started with the actual idea, the Kowloon Walled City story idea, then this network got too specific too soon. And so we start with, hey, we're writing a novel, in this case a series. And then the next thing would be, here's the way in which I like to do story building. So one level more specific. Here's the way in which I like to do character development. Here's the way in which I like the way I want to work. And then we work our way toward the actual specifics of the story itself. So you see it's even got, we're looking at drafting and revision, like how to even do revision. Like there's a lot going on here about, there's templates, there's stuff about settings, there's how to do character development, there's how to do narrative plot, there's how to manage continuity. And this thing is probably one of the best tools around for doing continuity. You'll see there that it just added those drafting and editing things, and it's going to now link things together. So research, drafting, revision, all those pieces are now being linked together. And you'll see that right here we have the updates, and it basically says what we just updated and changed. And then over here you'll see task completed, and it goes green. And this is the completion of a task. Now you can just keep talking, or you can click new task. In this case, we're going to start a new task because I want to integrate those other documents where we're going to put them in. But I want to point out here that what we sent was 2.3 million tokens and got back 29,000 tokens. Now, a bunch of that was cached, and this is something that some of the models do, which means that I don't know if this properly reflects the caching reducing the cost or not. But if the 2.1 million really is cached, then we actually spent quite a bit less than this because those cache tokens that were reused were not actually spent the same way as if this cache did not exist. So this is, if anything, I believe inflated. And looking at my bills, I think that's the case. I just don't know how much it's inflated. I would rather it be too scary and find out it's cheaper than the other way around. All right, so now that we've done that, I'm going to make this the commit where it's talk about a novel series context alteration and commit that. And I'm now sync changes. This will push it up to GitHub, which means that it'll be off my computer and in the cloud, in the GitHub website. And if anyone else had ever changed, I can pull those changes back down. This button will tell me that there are changes to pull, but in this case, it's not pushed out there. So now I'm going to go back to this, and then this inbox folder, I'm actually going to create an archive. Now I can ask the agent to do that, but a lot of these things I just do myself because I don't feel the need to spend another 25 cents for something that won't take me any time. So I'm going to create an archive folder. And in this case, because we've already built the network and the prompt, I'm going to make that there. And then in the inbox, I'm going to paste the new files. Except I think it put them in the archive instead of in there. Yeah, there we go. All right, so now I've dropped these files in. I'm going to start a new task. I'm going to flip it back to plan, and I'm going to say, actually not integrated. World building, character naming. I want to integrate all of that information into the context network. And hit the button, and we will get a plan conversation about how to do that. And you'll see it working to contextualize everything that it is finding in the documents. And now you see it's putting together the plan for what it's going to do. And if I don't even need to say anything I want, because it'll basically tell me what it's going to, what its general idea is. I can, when it says I can start by, if that's okay with you, you can just hit act and it will kick it off. So I'm going to kick that off. Now this should give you a general idea of what the pattern looks like. We haven't actually started drafting or writing any of that, but this is integrating other information. But if I had, instead of dropping those files in there, I'd said, so I have this idea for Kowloon Walled City. As a matter of fact, when this is done, I'll do a research task to see what that looks like. But I could say, I want to start working on some ideas for what the plot could be, what the setting could be. And if it was overly eager and said, oh, I'll start writing one for you. No, I want 4 or 5 options. How can we plan? You want to start having that kind of a conversation so that it works the way you want to work. Now, if you did want it to just boldly go forward and write a story, you could have it do that. You could have it write code. But the more you rein it in and pull back to get to really clear step-by-step kind of plans that it's writing out, the better it will be. And you'll see it's mostly just copying those frameworks over, but sometimes you will see it actually recognizes there's already pieces in place, and it will take a document like this and split it across many other places in all the relevant spots where it belongs. And anyway, so then you can have it draft a thing. You can say, I want to work on it scene by scene. That's a way to break it down. You can say, I want to write the plot first. I want to write the outline first. I want to come up with the characters. You can say, we just created a character. I think that name is too cliche. Can you rename that character to make it more unique? And then it will use this universal character naming thing, which is about getting to names that are less, getting to less cliche kind of namings of characters. And those interactions go back and forth. And if every time you complete a task, you commit those changes, and you decide you don't like what you renamed a character, you can go back and find what it was before. Although the decision log is also probably going to give you a pretty good history. But you can do things like say, I've decided to rename this character. Where do we all need to change? And in plan mode, it will point out all the places it needs to change, and then it will put a plan in place. And then when you flip to act, it will go through and change all those character names. And this pattern, I'll do more videos because this one went longer than I even intended it to, but it ought to give you an idea of what a context network is, what it looks like to work with one, and you can try it out by using the base one that's out there. I probably will show this one in another phase forward, like when it's further along. I'll show some other ones that have been running for literally a couple of months now that are much more mature and operate in a real well-oiled machine kind of way. If you've got any questions, obviously drop them in the comments. Put them in on the GitHub repos if you think there are changes you think that should be made, all that kind of stuff. But otherwise, I hope this was in some way illuminating for how this all works. And we will do one more thing before we leave, which is the research task, but I gotta let this one finish first, so we'll hold on. We're up to 16 files that have changed. These marked as deleted was me moving those files from one place into another. They're deleted and updated somewhere else is what Git actually tracks. Probably pretty close because updating the updates file is usually the last step of this kind of a task. But because it added new pieces, it's going to also, it works its way sort of up the tree. And right now it's updating the discovery file, which is a top level entry point. I had a glitch there. So while it does is you can see that it's making these changes. As soon as it's done, you actually can see the same kind of comparison after the fact. You don't have to like catch it as it all goes by. If you're not used to working with Git in a tool like this, you may not know. And the tools are linked in the base, that bare repository, VS Code, Klein, Open Router, all that kind of stuff is in that README. All right, it's almost done, I think. This pattern also can mean, like the nights where I spend the most money, it's because I'm letting one of these run in one window and then I switch to another instance where we're working on another project, and I'm sometimes juggling several. And that's when the money starts to add up, because you're not just burning $1 here, you're burning $1 in another window and another window. But it's also where a lot of the fun has been coming. And there, we'll mark the task completed. So we are going to, that I integrated the story frameworks. This commit message basically tells you what this batch of changes is. Hit commit, I'm going to sync that out. All right, and now I'm going to do a research task, because we've got the basics of story, we've got the basic novel series, basics of the way I like to do story, and now we're going to effectively start talking about the story itself. Now, I also will almost certainly grab pieces from Claude where I already had some of these conversations, but I'm going to pretend right now as though I didn't. Actually, the series would be about a space station that's an analog of on Earth, the way it's a liminal limbo kind of place between overlapping disputed jurisdictions, but people make lives for themselves anyway. All right, so this is precursor for setting context. Everything's about context. And then I'm going to ask it to, I'm going to say we. I do a lot of we should instead of you. The we tends to get better results because the documents that it was trained on that said things like we were more collaborative, and therefore you get more collaborative responses the more your conversation resembles the collaboration it saw. Think that through for a bit and it'll make sense if it didn't initially. To use to look up information about Kowloon, walled city, and the mechanisms at play that formed it and made it what it was, how those things work as fuel for a good story. And you can do etc. I do a lot. All right, so I'm basically telling it we should do a research tool, look up information, and like what made Kowloon City work, what formed it, like all of that, how it works for a good story, all that. And then it's going to start putting together a plan for that. Again, you get the first few reactions it's going to have is it bootstrapping itself into understanding what we're even talking about. And you'll note now it went context network, the discovery. We just watched it update that discovery. So now when it reads it again, it's got more information than it did on the last task about how that all works. Now I have a better understanding of the context network structure, better understanding of the research process, research structure, series structure. Every time I say that word about a bunch of books, my phone thinks it's me talking to it. And then you'll see, now here, this is Klein wants to use a tool on the research MCP server. I have it set to auto approve, but you'll see that it's about to do a deep research report on this topic: Kowloon Walled City, history, formation, social dynamics, governments, and why it became a unique liminal space between overlapping jurisdictions. The Klein Claude agent looked at everything we're talking about and formulated one that it wanted a deep research report instead of just a quick web search. It decided how to formulate this topic question, and it kicked off a research report. Now, because it used the deep research report, this one takes a bit of time to run. This is why the timeout on this MCP server is long, because this might take a few minutes to run, but the result will be worth it. Now, the MCP server itself that I have running is one that I literally used a context network to write the MCP server for research, and it uses the website perplexity.ai, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, you absolutely should be familiar with it, because it's the chatbot that actually functions the way a lot of people think ChatGPT should function, which is that you can ask it for answers to things that have factual answers, and it will go research on the web to find those answers and bring them back. I think that if people are currently are not paying for any premium AI service, that the first one they should pay for is Perplexity, because of that giving you a different version of what it means to ask a question and get an answer than the hallucinations that the basic models have been doing for so long. Now, I know ChatGPT and Claude have both added web search, but you often have to prompt it to use it. And in Perplexity, it's used by default. And so that's the one that I really do recommend people go to first if they are looking to spend their first $20 a month, which is what a lot of this stuff ends up being. So you'll see the research document came back, and it's looking at what it got back, what it wants to do about it. It's now going to run a medium research report, which is it wants to dig in a little bit more into some pieces. So it's splitting it apart. I think the deep research report might have had a glitch of it being a little too much information for it to handle it in one tool call. I don't know. This stuff's experimental in a lot of ways. So there, it just dug into liminality and all that kind of stuff. You'll see that it found key insights. It's now looking at the systematic world building to figure out what the sequence of events that would lead to it happening are. It's now putting together what it thinks an elemental genre might be. And this, it's veering a little bit into the story itself, but what kind of characters it could be. I'm going to ask it to clarify or tell it like that looks like a good plan, but anything that's specific to a story, we should treat as the first novel. And then I'll say when I toggle to act what I want it to do. So when I toggle to act, let's document that into the context network. I'm going to kick that off, and I'm just going to let that run. I need to end this video and get going, but hopefully this was a decent overview. If not, I'm going to try to make more. But in the meantime, that's what I can give you this morning. Have a good one. Catch you next time.